Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the final recap of Tata Steel 2022. It's been an awesome couple of weeks of amazing chess games in the Challengers and Masters section. It's been super fun watching new players blossom at the beginning of the calendar year and just seeing all the journey of whether it's Magnus Carlsen reaching 2,900 or whether it's one of the top 10 or 15 GMs in the world trying to spoil his legacy or his quest, or if it's a 2,600 rated GM like Arjun Erigaisi just absolutely dominating, and that's the next wave, that's the next graduating class into Super GM territory of 2,700s. Today we're going to actually look at every single game because... well, you'll see. We have time to look at every single game for reasons that are very understandable. And thank you once again for all the support through all these recaps. We are going to begin with Magnus Carlsen saying goodbye to everybody. And this game is already over with a win for Magnus Carlsen by walkover, by default. Unlike the win for Rafael Nadal versus Dmitry, I always make that mistake. I say Dmitry Medvedev because that's the guy in the government of Russia, Daniil Medvedev. So I was watching that earlier today. Magnus Carlsen wins because Dubov has a positive COVID test, and that is 9.5 points out of 13 for Magnus. The next two games we are going to look at, we will look at very quickly. Richard Rapport versus Anish Giri. Here we have a Grunfeld, so a fighting opening. Obviously a fighting opening, but... an opening that runs the risk of being a forced draw, because there are lines in the Grunfeld where if white does not want to play chess, white will not play chess. So we have knight f3, bishop g7, and now we actually have a transposition back to the main line. Obviously, you can just go for that here with e4, but we have it here. And now, obviously, white has a very massive choice of what to do. Bishop e3, there's many lines. h3 is a move I played recently. But we actually get a very unexciting line, which is the line where white does not protect the c3 pawn, the entire kind of stronghold of the white center, and instead allows the capture, and the queen is trapped. Rather, it has to dance back and forth, and we have a draw. This is actually the second time this tournament that Anish Giri made this draw with black. The first time was against Sergei Karyakin, who didn't want to play that day either. So, kind of interesting. I mean, this is to be expected in the final round, particularly when there's no prize money in Tata Steel. In Tata Steel, I think all the players are paid beforehand. I don't think there's a prize fund. I might be mistaken, but I'm pretty sure I'm right. So Magnus already wins. All the players got their money. They make a quick draw, and they finish. Richard Rapport finishes in a tie for second place. Anish Giri finishes actually completely by himself in third place. Technically fourth because there's a tie for second, third, but 7.5 out of 13. And the next game between Mamedyarov and Caruana is a very, very standard Queen's Gambit declined. Bishop f4 is one of the main lines, and we have c5. And generally speaking, there is no advantage whatsoever here for white. Just a game that you can play, and Mamedyarov trades everything. So he just trades the whole board. He plays a3 to prevent anything from hitting him on the diagonal, and offers a draw on move 13. So I told you we were going to make it through the games very quickly. Not all of them, but 3 of them. And with this draw, Mamedyarov finishes with 8, like Rapport, and he ties for second place. Caruana finishes with 6.5. Forgettable tournament, definitely. He'll look to go back to the drawing board and do better this year. But the next 3 games are all decisive. They're all very interesting. And they're a proper way to send off this tournament. So, the first game that I would like to show you is the game between Karyakin and Gujarati. Yesterday, Vida Gujarati, obviously. Yesterday, Karyakin lost to Shankland, and he's had a weird event with all the Twitter stuff and everything. So, we'll see if he shows up to play, or we'll see if he shows up to make a draw. And Vidit also had a bit of a rough last maybe 3-4 rounds with the Mamedyarov game yesterday. He had a very good game against Magnus to gain some momentum back, but this game began in a very strange way. So first of all, with white, if you want an advantage, you try to play bishop c4 or bishop b5. I mean, the Scotch is a decent surprise weapon, but the 4-knight Scotch is a dead draw. Like, it's theoretically solved because black just has more development than white. And white tries to counteract that with damaging black's structure. Black tries to counteract the damaging to the structure by attacking the white center. Both sides castle, and there is a handful of theory here, but this game was very strange because there was one trade, and then there was another trade, and then there was another trade of pawns, and then a few moves later, there was a giant trade of queens and rooks. When I woke up, well, actually, no, I've been up for a while because I was watching the not the full match between Medvedev and Nadal, but I was up for a while through the middle of that match, and I was like, wow, okay, they're gonna make a draw. But it's not so simple. It's actually not so simple. Black needs to be precise here to make a draw. The reason is, I mean, white is more active. That's just it. White just has nagging pressure. So the rook comes to the open file, the bishop retreats so that it's not going to be a target for the rook on the d6 square in the future. Vidit brings his king, and Sergey plays this very annoying rook b8. So the point is, obviously you want to play king e7 so that you can move your bishop, but then rook a8 and you lose the pawn. You might not lose the pawn, but you will paralyze your position trying to defend it. So it's unpleasant, right? So rook e8, he goes back. No back rank checkmate. Bishop now is activated. Rook retreats. And now is really where Vidit can get very close to completely equalizing. He can play actively with the bishop to c4. For example, rook b7, a6. And now this pawn will be traded for this pawn potentially. Of course, if you don't take, then I will just defend. He also can maybe go for a rook endgame. So take, and, you know, if you go for rook b7, this is just a draw. Dead draw. Like, a pawn traded for c pawn, dead draw. Rook e5 is what he plays, though, and he allows Sergey to now activate with tempo, right? So now the rook either has to go back or the pawn has to come forward, and then the rook is stuck defending the pawn. And the thing is, if the pawns are not both on the same rank, on the 7th rank, it's hard to guard both of them. You really have to get your rook in the right position, and if you do, then your rook is really passive. So that's inconvenient. Rook e7, now rook a3. See, you click the rook back, now you go over. Now Vidit's got to defend. Vidit can still maybe bail into an endgame, right? And then rook a7, bishop f3, pawn f3, and the damaging of this structure is enough potentially to draw him the game. So for example, rook e5, rook c7, rook a5. This is very instructive. You have to win the outside passer oftentimes. It's often the a pawn, because if you leave rook and a, you know, for example, if you go like rook e2 and get an endgame like this, it's probably still a draw, but there's higher chances because the pawn is so far away. Just saying, the c pawn would most likely just be a simpler draw, but Vidit chooses to keep the pawns on the board and tries to play like, you know, like this. But now bishop b3, and now rook a4, and Sergey just has a really annoying position. I mean, his structure doesn't take any damage, Vidit doesn't want to lose any pawns, and now Sergey begins the Russian school of chess. So he has the beneficial split situation. The whole queen side is paralyzed, right? Now, is he lost? No. Computer probably holds this with black. King d8 played by Vidit, giving up the pawn, trying to activate the bishop. But right now, Vidit probably should have gone for this. And then bishop a4, rook b6. And the difference, the way you lose this pawn is you have a fork at the end. So you have this. And for example, the move bishop b3, king d6. Rook d5 check, king c6. And it's actually white who is reduced to very passive play as black tries to scoop up the pawn, right? c5, rook takes b5, rook takes b3, I apologize. And we might just have a big exchange and everything just ends in a draw. But Vidit gives the pawn away incorrectly. So right, he had to give the pawn away in a certain way. And now Sergey he's a pawn up. He's a pawn up with all the benefits of his position. And in positions where you're a pawn down like this, you have to think about what's a draw? Rook and bishop is a draw? Or is it a bishop endgame that's a draw? Or is it a rook endgame that's a draw? Or is it king and pawn? Okay, it's almost never king and pawn endgame. Like 99 times out of 100, king and 5 beat king and 4. The only time king and 5 doesn't beat king and 4 is in your games. And that's when king and 5 loses to king and 4. So let's not even get started there. Okay, so now Sergey, look at this. He's using his flank pawn to try to create more weaknesses in the black position. Very instructive. He chips away. Now he has an imbalanced structure, which he might use to get a passed pawn. Active king. And you just see Vidit lost the pawn, but he was trying to get active, but it's white who is more active. So as Sergey has all the trump cards in his position, it's just a matter of technique. And maybe it's still holdable. It might still be holdable, but it's a pain, and it's a real big pain. And right when Sergey had an opportunity, he surrounded the black rook, and is basically saying this endgame is winning. Bishop endgame. It's also very important that the bishops are on the same color. If they're on opposite color, it's a draw. It's just a draw because you just create a fortress on the opposite color. You don't have that luxury here, and white has 2 passed pawns. And combine that with the bishop, combine that with the king. Like if the king goes to f6, which is obviously very natural, bishop d3, bishop e4. King just can't stop everybody, right? The bishop goes back, c6. And now, you know, Vidit tries to get some counterplay. Sergey plays c7. So naturally, you're going to go after this pawn with king d6, then I play f6. Okay, you go here, f7. Can't stop everybody. You just can't stop him, right? So c7, a5, a4. You can't move that pawn anymore. King f6, king f2, h4, king g2, king e5, king h2, king f6, bishop d3, bishop f1. What's Sergey doing? Look at this. Black can't move. So now the black bishop has to move, because if you play king e5, I can play f4 check first. I can also play f6. So bishop d7, bishop g4, and black slowly is going to suffocate here, running out of moves. So king e3, king d4, king c5, king b6. Beautiful. And the game ends on the 64th move. 64 squares, 64 moves. Beautiful technique. He stops the pawns. He constantly threatens f6 to trade. So for example, even here, f6 looks like a threat. It's a little scary because you might allow this. Little bit scary. But you can just go here, h2, and probably just win this endgame, right? Where you have queen and bishop. They're defending each other. The king can go over here. It's probably winning, but he chooses to do it without anything. And yeah, heartbreaking finish to the tournament for Vidit, who started so well. But, you know, a lot of these tournaments, I feel, especially as you were an evolving player, and Vidit entered this tournament rated 27-27. Through the first half of the event, he was probably about 27-35. But it's just like the Nepo situation. Nepo is oftentimes applauded for some of his incredible creative chess. But it's the energy, right? 13 rounds, 2 weeks of chess. Sometimes that energy fades and mistakes can pile up. So Vidit loses a few rating points at the end of the day, ending the tournament 6 out of 13. And Karyakin, how did Karyakin got 7? So for all the memes and all the dreams, he got 7 points. Next game I'd like to show you is the game between Jordan van Forest and Shankland. This one begins, well, it's a last round battle, so you might as well play a London, right? No prep, no need to prepare anything, just play a London system, but an interesting London system, because if you look at this position in the database, here the move knight d2 is played. There is also obviously trick lines with knight c3 trying to go for this stuff, but bishop e2 is a fascinating move. It's a fascinating move because white does not commit the queen side. We don't know where white wants to move these pieces just yet. And bishop e2 has been played. I've played this in Blitz myself. The point is that if you just play some natural moves like this, if black tries to go for queen b6, then now knight c3 is very strong. Because you're castled, you're threatening actually knight b5, so queen b2, knight b5, black resigns on the spot. The game is over. Queen is probably getting trapped over here, or knight c7. If you don't take on b2, why'd you put the queen there? Right, like, so if you're just gonna, that doesn't make any sense. So the point is that with this move order, you try to get black to take on d4. And now, folks, I want to draw your attention to the structure of this position. So imagine the game began with a Caro-Kann, and it was an exchange variation of the Caro-Kann. If we play an exchange variation of the Caro-Kann, black is going to move both knights, light squared bishop out, e6, dark squared bishop out. Why would white voluntarily close in his... Why would black voluntarily close in his light squared bishop in an exchange Caro-Kann, right? Why? But that's exactly what we have in the game on the board. I don't know if you noticed that. I just clicked 2 different variations, but it's the same position. So using this bishop e2 move order, Jordan gets his opponent into an unpleasant exchange Caro-Kann. Fascinating, right? The critical way to play against this is actually to play queen b6 without knight c6. It's to take without knight c6 and then go here, force a concession out of white, and then play bishop d6. Now white has conceded a passive queen move, right? And black is able to more or less equalize. But Shankland doesn't do that and now has to suffer with a passive light squared bishop, which he tries to get rid of immediately. So he tries to just break in the center, but he already played e6. So we see Jordan's prep actually paying off. He gets Shankland into an unpleasant position. You're learning something. Now we have a situation with an isolated pawn. When you play against an isolated pawn and a hanging queen, not anymore though. When you play against an isolated pawn, what you want to do is blockade the square in front of it. Don't let the pawn go forward. Success. trade pieces. Pretty successful. We've traded some pieces because now you play queen d4. You get a knight to attack this pawn. You get a rook to attack this pawn. You win the pawn. Then you win the game. Now, the only way that a player with an isolated pawn can deal with the isolated pawn is to avoid all of those things or trade the pawn for massive activity. Just not trade it, give it away for massive activity. How is he going to give the pawn away for massive activity? I mean, that just seems impossible here, right? Well, let's leave it to Shankland. Shankland does get blockaded, and this is a terrible position. Like, this is a really unpleasant position for black. Rook d1, rook e3, rook d3. At some point, this pawn's going to be lost. But Jordan wants to do it like this. He just wants to get rid of it. You can't take my pawn because the knight in the middle. Shankland's like, bro, take it. Take my pawn. Jordan's like, if I take now, you go knight g5. You try to get my bishop. No, you can't play knight g5. Shankland's like, if you don't take my pawn right now, I'm going to punch you in the face. Jordan's like, you can't threaten me. There's TDs everywhere. Also, this whole room, bro. Like, what do you... Shankland's like, all right, we'll see about that. Pawn takes pawn. He comes back. He blockades. Now Jordan has to win. All right? His prep paid off. Beautiful, beautiful play against an isolated pawn. Now, how's... oh, my gosh. Excuse me. I am allergic to losing pawns. I would never. Rook takes rook and rook d1. We are a pawn up. Let's win the endgame. Bishop d7, king h2. In the endgame, we have to take as much space as possible without conceding any sort of activity or weaknesses to our opponent. And we need to take action with our king. So we bring king g3. Here comes rook c4, king f4. Oh, beautiful. The king has joined the party. Rook c5, rook d2. But now Shankland's like, I have some activity as well. Jordan's a cultured gentleman. He knows that en passant is forced. Takes, rook d1. And if you kind of just look at the position, it does not look like white has made much progress. Black is now going to bully the queen side, right? Knight c4. Sometimes in chess, when we have something extra, we have to resort to protecting it with everybody. So we can't play, you know, sometimes have to play really passive moves like rook b1, but then black plays rook a4 and just the problem, right? So Jordan at this point is probably like, all right, I mean, knight b3, I'm trying my best. Rook b5, knight d2. This pawn has been left to die, but it's not so easy. For example, knight takes b2 is met with check, forcing the king back, check, forcing the king back. And even though black has won the pawn back, white's d6 pawn is nobody to mess with or underestimate. So instead of that, we have check, and actually Shankland goes for this rook endgame. He chooses not to win the pawn, but just to hold white. Like, Jordan's trying to break break free, and Shankland is like holding him. You know, it's like a fight in basketball. You know, when all these sports teams are gonna like fight on the court, but they never fight on the court because they don't know how to fight. Some of them do, but most of them don't. So you just hold me back, bro. So that's what's happening in Jordan's position. He can't really move. King g2, king e5, and actually, if I gotta give some position credit, it's white's position. It's black's position. I mean, he's extremely active, right? Extremely active, and this pawn is very, very, I mean, it's just very difficult to say what's going to happen with it. So rook c, nothing. You get nothing there. So you got to come back. Rook b6. Although, you might ask why he didn't play king e5. I don't know. I don't know why he didn't play king e5. I legitimately can't answer that question. Maybe he didn't like something with rook h1. Maybe he didn't like the, you know, something. I don't know. Instead, he went back to b6, anticipating rook h1, and then he can go king e5, but now b4. So, a slight inaccuracy, I would say. I don't think you should have let Jordan just take space and kick the rook out. King e5. Now, admittedly, rook b6 was the final move. It's the 40th move, so maybe he had low time. And he just made a split-second decision. But there is a major difference. I mean, the major difference is that now the queen side of white is mobile, and the rook is very passive for black. So, he tries here to sacrifice the a-pawn. This is very instructive. And now white's structure really sucks, but he's 2 pawns up. I mean, temporarily. But he's going to use the time that this rook is going to win this pawn and that pawn to go over here and win those 2 pawns. So, very nice idea by Jordan. And this only happened because Sam played rook b6, right? So now Jordan runs over here and sneaks in, right? He's attacking that side of the board. Check, okay. He's obviously not going to repeat moves. Pawn up. And Shankland goes b5. So now Jordan is up 2 pawns. Yet it's still a draw with best play. It's still a draw with best play because black is threatening to promote, and white's position is very slow. It's very difficult for white to move. You try to move the rook and play g5. The second you play g5, this bishop comes right here. Bishop will help escort the b-pawn. while this bishop is really not good. It has nowhere to move, right? And even if it did, you would have to lose your d-pawn. You don't want to lose your d-pawn. It's a pawn. So now we have b4, rook g8, and now we have a move that is a shocking mistake. Now, okay, I mean, shocking mistake is strong, and I would lose this position with both colors. Nah, I don't think I would lose this with white, but I would definitely lose it if I was playing black. Now, naturally, you just played b4. So what would you play with black here? You would play b3, right? You would play b3. The reason I don't think Sam liked this is because if his pawn and rook both get stuck, his rook can't move, his pawn can't move, he probably felt he was just losing. However, apparently, he can go king c5 and allow g5 and bishop f5. And somehow black just guards everything. And then we'll try to threaten an infiltration, or we'll try to threaten bishop c2 and trying to push this pawn. Or if the king moves up, actually, there is just b2, sacking the pawn and winning the bishop. So somehow, if you get to king c5, white has no moves. White is in a zugzwang. Zugzwang, right? White can't do anything. Let's say you play rook b7 trying to get rid of this. Bishop b5 closes the door. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. That's not good, right? So Sam had to play b3 and try to either block this or activate this, and somehow white has no moves. Just incredible that material can be offset by rampant activity in endgames. But Sam doesn't play b3. He misses something. He plays rook a5 with the intention, I suppose, of closing the door on this rook with his rook. The problem is there is g5. And now when you play b3, I play g6. And by the time you play b2, then I do this. And I'm sorry, but I can let you, queen. That's the difference. I was never intending to stop you. I'm in an endgame where I have 2 extra pawns. Now the difference is I only have 1 active piece, but oh boy, is that piece pissed off. That piece is very angry that you did not let me be active earlier, and my king is safe. So in my inactivity, I had the safer king. But the safer king of blacks could not be exploited until I made a queen. The queen can attack on the diagonals. It doesn't matter that the rook can attack on straightaways, because once the king goes to a square like this, it's safe. A queen can continue bullying, although technically not from that square, but from the other side. So g6, both sides promote, and Sam's lost. And Jordan just hides his king. There is no skewer. There is bishop g2. And now he just has to hunt this king down brutally. The threat of a queen trade, by the way, works because this is a winning endgame. So the threat of a queen trade makes him activate his queen, and it's just a matter of making a checkmate net around the king. And here he doesn't even take the bishop because, now this is very funny. He doesn't take the bishop. Why doesn't he take the bishop? Just take the bishop and it's mate next move, right? Oops. Oops. It's a stalemate trap. Oh, I'm not going to take you. No, you will. You will take me. You absolutely will take me. Because if you run away the other way, I'm actually not going to take your bishop. That might not even be a draw. I'm just going to go here, and then I'm going to do this. So you can't take the bishop. Nice trap idea, but you have to give a check. And now it's either queen e7 and mate, or king e8 and I take with check. So we can never count out a 2700 rated GM. Jordan Van Forest ends this tournament in a 5th place spot with 7 out of 13. And he had 9 decisive games. 9. 5 wins and 4 losses. Crazy. This man came to fight. Respect this man. He's at his highest rating ever. We'll talk about all the rating change at the end of the tournament. You had the patience to watch. You're still here, right? You with me? You're amazing. You are amazing. All right, final game of the tournament. This was the final game that ended. Pragnananda versus Andrei Yesipenko. Will the Russian 2700 junior continue rising up the ranks? Will Prague bounce back from... Wait, how did Prague do yesterday? Hold on. Was bounce back the right word? Yeah, from the loss against Fabiano, right, because he had the forfeit win versus Dubov. So he didn't win yesterday. He got it's an unrated forfeit, right? So we have a Nimso. A3 for the second time this tournament. A3 is not seen at the top level. It's not a way for white to get an advantage, but it is a way for you to get an interesting position. So takes. Now, in the game, Anish played against Jordan. We saw this. We saw knight c6, knight a5. We did not see the move c5 until much later. Here, this is the principled move. E3, and now what white wants to do here is build up a big boy center. The center is actually gender neutral, but in the case of Prague playing it, I'm calling it a big boy center, okay? So, knight e2, and then pushing the e and the f pawns is like what you want to do here. You put this so you can move your f pawn. You can also play knight f3, but then it's very difficult to actually activate your position. So, knight e2, e4. Now, I have gotten games here where if left unchecked, white just plays like e5, f4, and if black just tries to go for this pawn, like you can just play castles and just go for mate. I've had blitz games where I just go for a massive attack. It's probably not the best way to play. Like it's probably better to play in a slightly different way here with maybe like queen a4 to make sure your pawn is protected. But it's super weird position. But Yasipenko plays the best move. The best move here for black is actually to anticipate e5 and play knight e8. Now, if you don't know this, don't worry about it. Very high level stuff. The point is that you're waiting for white to play f4. So that when white does play f4, you play f5. Now, that is pretty shocking because now the white center is completely under attack from both sides. It can get very crazy. So, for example, I've had games that went e5, knight a5, d5, and my opponent would take my pawn, and I would close the cage on black. So I've had games like this. Very unclear. White is down a pawn, but has a clenching, a bear trap of a space advantage. And, you know, if you close the queen side down and then just go violently attack over here, you win. But if you don't succeed in the attack, you lose because you're just a pawn down. Black will expand on the queen side and beat you. So I've had games that go like this as well, but we have takes. This is actually the main line of this position. I don't think the players were completely aware of that because they were spending a decent amount of time. Bishop e3, d6, defending the pawn. So white has a completely dead center. Nothing can move. However, black has weaknesses. So black has some squares in here that can be exploited, a file that can be taken advantage of, pawns that are very deceiving. For example, if you try to go win them, there's tactics on the king, and also lurking in this position is an attack. An attack, queen f3, knight h5, an attack on g7, an attack on the diagonal. Very complex position. Now, according to theory, there is a line here that goes like this. g6, bishop takes f5. Pawn takes f5, queen d5 check. Sacking, well, winning back the knight, right? Rook f7 here, bishop b7, queen a4. But in this position, black has to know one move. Black has to know one move to get advantage, despite being a pawn down, and that move is h5. Which, if you don't know, you ain't never playing that move. Never in your life. I don't care. Never playing that move. You have to see that move 5 moves ahead. Point is that if white takes, okay, queen h4, and the attack is, black is winning. Black has the attack. You come back to g3, rook h7, oh, rook h7, you lose. Just lose. Can't guard the attack. You can jump out of the ship and try to hang on. I go rook g7, you lose. So it's very dangerous to take the h5 pawn, but white obviously is not losing. White has some way to maybe fight back. But you have to know this. Yasipenko here thinks for a while and plays this move, avoiding queen d5 check. So they're on their own. We are in brand new territory as of queen f3. White is going to try to use the fact that the center is broken to maneuver the pieces in an advantageous way. And black is also going to try to maneuver, right? It's both sides trying to outmaneuver one another. Again, if black just tries to attack the queen side, black has weaknesses as well. Bishop c5, rook e7, still problematic for blacks, right? So we have g6. Here, Prague reroutes. So he brings both pieces back, puts his knight in the center to defend the c4 pawn, and then puts his bishop on h4. It's very interesting maneuvering battle. Queen g7, rook c1. Admitting that the rook can be passive so long as everything stays protected, right? So rook bc1, very happy. Okay, great. Rook e6, and now Prague is like, I'm gonna solidify that queen side. You can't take. It looks like you can take. You can't take knight d5. Bad news. Tactics flying all over the place. But Yasipenko takes. He actually says, well, I don't like the prospect of a5 because if I don't take, my knight has to leave anyway, right? So okay, I'm gonna take knight d5. Now, if rook takes, there is this. Rook is coming to e7. Black can resign. Not that dramatic, but black can resign very soon. Bishop b7 back. Rook e6, but now we still have a rook coming to e1. So it's a position that's hanging on a balance for one move. Like black has to find only moves. So at this point, with this knight hanging, black has to find the only defensive move, which is g5. G5, risking the integrity of your king's safety. If I take knight G5, hitting the queen, right? If I take on G5, you have this, but it's far from over, okay? It is far from over. You are almost losing. But rook F7, and somehow your king is the hero. This knight, I don't know what the hell that knight is, grazing in the field somewhere, is that horse, but you're okay. Somehow you survive this. Yesipenko plays queen d7 guarding his knight, and now there is the ever so slight queen g3, although I think queen f2 was even preferred by Stockfish. And now you are sliding out of the way. You are threatening knight f6, and the only thing that black can do here is take the knight. Retreat, allow rook e7, and walk away from the king. The king is left alone with the rook. c4 is played, locking the center, and somehow the game continues. Yesipenko must have seen this position and went, what the F is this? Why would I ever do this? White can just play, I don't know, h3. Let's just begin with h3. Queen g5, queen h6, mate. Bishop g5, bishop h6, h4, h5. Where's my play? Now, Stockfish tries to claim that the knight goes back and somehow the game continues. Like it's gonna rook f7. To a human, this is utterly depressing. And instead of that, Yesipenko just says, nah, not doing it. I'm going to sack my exchange. I'm just going to sack the exchange. He must have thought he was losing no matter what. So he said, I'm going to sack the exchange. There is now less danger to my king because this is protected. I have a passed pawn. Let's try to hold this position. And yeah, now it's up to Prague to find a way to win. So Prague protects mate, trades a piece, queen e3. Mate is coming, so you have to protect. Now queen back to e2. It's time to go after this knight in the a file. Queen d8. Queen a2, bishop d7, bishop c2. I'm getting rid of that knight, and I'm going to take on a7. Okay, the game must be over. Knight back to c8, queen b7, knight e7. And now it's the 40th move, and we have h4. In this position, there are many ways to win. Most of them involve trading black's light-squared bishop, because once the light-squared bishop falls, a lot of the weaknesses just open up, whereas this bishop right now kind of does a good job of defending. There was one questionable moment in this game when Prague went for a queen trade. So Prague was convinced that this endgame was winning. However, he didn't have to trade queens. He could have just won queen b5. He could have kept the queen on, queen b6, tried to continue to mess with the black position with his queen and his rook. But he was so sure. Not everybody was so sure, because here Yesipenko walked over with his king. And in positions like this, when a rook is threatening to infiltrate versus a knight or a bishop, you look for a fortress. Now, I'm letting my Stockfish run to about depth 26, 27 during this recap. It thinks black has a fortress because white has no pawn play, which is the inherent problem of these pawns, right? White has no pawn play. White also cannot get in the middle with the king. If white plays g4, I mean, that might be a try to sack 2 pawns, right? But no, that's too much. So for a while in this game, it seemed like actually Yesipenko had a fortress. Seemed like Yesipenko had a fortress. I mean, I don't know. It's a little bit tricky to figure out what piece he should move because obviously the rook can come in on 2 sides and also a pawn sack is available sometimes. So you have to calculate that. But Yesipenko must have been feeling pretty damn good right now. He's like, I don't see how he's going to beat me, right? But then Prague played bishop a4. Bishop a4 is saying, yo, you could take here. But if you take here, I got bishop e8, right? I have bad intentions. And knight e7, check, is my idea. I'm going to sack my rook. I'm going to take on g6. I'm going to win all your pawns. I have 3 pawns, and I'm going to go. That must be the idea, right? That must be the idea of bishop a4. And that's yeah, I mean, that's in all likelihood, that is going to win him the game. And now the question is, well, how could this have been prevented? I don't know. I don't know how it could have been prevented. Maybe he could have played knight b6. This could have been an idea. This could have been Yesipenko's entire idea to prevent bishop a4. To play knight b6 at some point. Like, maybe that was necessary. He had to anticipate this, and he had to realize that knight b6, and if rook a6, king c7, no, I apologize, that wouldn't work. Knight goes back to c8 if the rook comes to a6. And now, I guess the difference is that the rook hangs on a6, and you don't have the same idea. Must be it, right? But because he goes for this, and Yesipenko's like, I'm not taking that pawn on c4, hell no, bishop b5. Now we have a problem because I'm getting in. Black is out of moves. How is black out of moves? Let's say you just try to continue the fortress. King d2. You try to continue the fortress with king c7, king c2. You try to continue the fortress, I have rook a8. I mean, I have a handful of moves. Right, I can do this. I can also maybe even walk my king. Like, I can walk my king the whole way if I really want to. But because the bishop is now on b5, it's winning. And the game actually ends with this. That is how the game ends. Because knight e7, rook a7 would lead to this. Yesipenko resigns after bishop e8 is played. And Tata Steel 2022 is over. The final results in terms of ratings. Prague gains a decent amount of points. I think 9 or 10 points. I'm using the website Live 2700, by the way. So Prague gains 7 points. He's now up to 2619. Magnus gains 3 rating points, and he's 2868. Fabiano losing 11 rating points, down to 4th in the world at 2781, his lowest rating in 8 years, maybe. Mamedyarov gains 9 points and is 5th in the world, up 4 spots. And all of this is on Live 2700. I'll put a link in the description. The craziest story, obviously, of this whole thing, Arjun Erigaisi, who gained an outstanding 28 rating points and went up 54 spots in the world rankings from 134 to 80, breaking in the top 100. Yeah, it's actually funny. I don't know what the next classical tournament is for a lot of these players. We're gonna have the online tour for a while, and till then, I mean, I guess we have the Grand Prix, but the next time that we're gonna see Magnus in a classical event, I don't know. But I do know one thing, and it's the fact that I have greatly enjoyed making these recaps. And I thank you all so much for making it 36, 37, 38 minutes into them with me. It's like Chess Sports Center, you know? We talk chess, we make jokes, and hopefully we have wars in the comments to boost engagement. Till the next recap or the next video, appreciate you all very much. Have a great final 2 days of your January. Get out of here.